Make presenter. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Schmott from Tyndall Oliver. This is the local agency Traffic Safety Academy. Everyone that's here received the email that is up on my screen right now. A few important things on there. If you have any technical issues or questions downloading the webinars or presentations afterwards, my email is there, ashmott@tyndalloliver.com. Questions about upcoming webinars, topics, things general to the Safety Academy. Dennis's email's here. He's our coordinator. And the website where the presentations are hosted are here at the Tampa Bay Traffic Safety.com/local area Traffic Safety Academy. A hyperlink to that takes you to our webpage where you see the upcoming webinars, including today's topic, the completed webinars for the year with their AICP credit numbers, some general information about the Academy, and then we have posted the past recordings for all of the presentations in PDF format and the video recordings of the actual webinars with the spoken with that. At the bottom of this as well, we have some additional resources. The PDH request form for professional engineers in Florida is here, as well as the AICP information for that. With that, I will hand it over to Dennis for the introduction of today's presenter.
Good morning. Before I introduce our presenter, I want to say good morning and introduce you, give you a brief introduction on the Safety Academy. And this is Dennis Falloon. I'm the FDOT Local Agency Traffic Safety Academy Coordinator and Consultant. And I want to welcome you to the 5th webinar for the 2018 series. Today's safety webinar topic is Policies, Tools, and Guidance for Improved Quality of Bicycling Facilities, Part 1. This is a 3-part series, and as you will look at the topics set out on the webpage that Anthony talked about, it will show you, it will indicate which ones are Part 1, 2, and 3, and what months they'll be presented. It'll be presented by Brooke Struve, PE, Safety and Design Engineer, FHWA, who is based in Colorado. There will be some poll questions that Anthony will handle for today. And with that, I'd like to give you the brief introduction on the Academy. This is the FDOT Local Agency Traffic Safety Academy. It's been put in place to provide information on safety-related issues to enhance your local safety program. It's in its 6th year. It usually runs in a 2-hour increment of 10 a.m. to 12 o'clock, usually on a Wednesday. They will end in December 2018. They usually, like I said, they go for 2 hours, but usually no less than an hour. And there's links here that Anthony has already mentioned to you about registration into the webpage. And here is a calendar of events, and I would like to point out that we just recently added yesterday August 8th, guidance for evaluating the safety impacts of intersection site distance, which is a new one. And then today we will hear from Brooke, policies, tools, and guidance for improved quality of bicycling facilities, Part 1. Also, as Anthony mentioned, there are credits submitted for AICP planners. And then if you're an engineer, you can request PDH requirements, and that's all posted out there for your view. And my name is Dennis Falloon. And with that, I'd just like to add with Brooke that she's a design engineer for FHWA, who is based in Colorado, and she provides technical assistance and training nationwide on design flexibility, performance-based design decision-making, and designing for the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists. She also has a BS in Civil Engineering from Brigham Young University and is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Utah. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brooke. Anthony, give it a screen.
Okay, everybody should be seeing my screen now. Is that correct?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Dennis. I'm pleased to be joining you today. Today we're going to be focusing on policies and tools and guidance for safe bicycling facilities. In the subsequent sessions, we'll focus more on the specific design, features, and countermeasures to enhance safety for bicyclists. And just so that I'm not a disembodied voice, here's a picture of me so you can picture who I am, and if you download the presentation, you'll have my contact information, and you are, of course, welcome to reach out to me if you have questions or if you're looking for technical assistance. We also have an FHWA division office in your state, and so you're welcome to reach out to them, and they can get in touch with me as well. And I'm with the FHWA Resource Center, and so our job is to provide technology deployment, technical assistance. We teach a lot of workshops and respond to questions as they come up. So as we're talking today, I want to start out with a note of caution. Things are happening very quickly in the field of designing for bikes, particularly with the traffic control. And you will probably see things in your community. You may see things in the pictures that I'm showing you. You may see things in national guidance documents that have become outdated. And so I just want you to warn you that just because you've found a picture of it doesn't mean it's the best and most appropriate application of traffic control or other design features. I'll be giving you some links and resources towards the end of this presentation where you can stay current and stay up to date on where to find the latest and greatest information. So I want to begin by talking about, why are we doing all this effort, particularly for bicycle safety, or bicyclist safety, I would rather say. We've been very auto-focused in our country for a long time. A lot of people are based or have set up their transportation needs based on automobile. So where's the shift come, or why do we want to consider other modes of travel? There certainly are some opportunities. First of all, in a national study of transportation, it was found that 50% of all trips are less than or equal to 3 miles in length. More than 1/3 of US adults say they would commute to work by bike if safe facilities were available. And finally, 1 out of every 11 US households do not own an automobile. And I just realized I skipped past some poll questions, so you might already have an answer to one of your poll questions here, but let's let Anthony put the poll questions up.
We do have the answer to one of the poll questions, but let's see if people were paying attention. What percentage of trips in the US are less than 3 miles in length? 37%, 50%, or 60%? We'll let the audience vote here in a minute. All right, we'll close this poll and share the results with the audience. So we have 15% of our audience saying that 37% are less than 3 miles in length. 48% of our audience says that 50% of the trips are less than 3 miles in length, and 36% of the audience is saying that 60% of trips are less than 3 miles in length. So we gotta see that slide again and see what the number is. Would you like me to do the next poll right after this one?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and do the next poll?
Okay. The next one is, how long are typical trips for the casual, less confident biker? 1 to 5 miles, 5 to 8 miles, or 10 to 12 miles? The audience seems to be in much more agreement in the response to this one. Yep, definite consensus. We'll go ahead and close this poll and share the responses. 93% of the audience is saying that the typical trip is 1 to 5 miles. 8% of the audience says 5 to 8 miles, and no one says that the typical trip is 10 to 12 miles.
Well, I think we have some good understanding of bike travel, particularly with the length of a comfortable trip for the casual, less confident rider. So just to review the answers, 50% of all trips in the US are less than 3 miles. And the answer, the other correct answer to the poll question was 1 to 5 miles in length is the typical trip that a casual, less confident rider will take. And then just refreshing on this slide again, more than 1/3 of US adults say they would commute by bike if they felt safe doing so. And 1 out of 11 households don't own an automobile. And so they're looking for other modes of travel to get to work, to go to school, to go to the library or the doctor. And so having options that are available is important. Let's talk about the characteristics of the experienced and confident bicyclist, or you might refer to them as the spandex warriors, the ones you see with all the gear and the $12,000 bicycle on the roadway, as compared to the casual, less confident rider who might be riding more of a cruiser bike and have a small bag of groceries or a backpack heading off to school. So the experienced and confident rider will navigate on the streets. The casual, less confident rider may have difficulty gauging traffic or be unfamiliar with the rules of the road. The experienced and confident rider, for some of them, they'll prefer a bike lane and shoulders when they're available or a shared use path, although you will see many of them remain on the street with higher speed traffic. The casual, less confident rider has a very strong preference for those shared use paths or bike lanes on low volume streets or being separated from traffic in general. The experienced and confident rider will prefer a direct route, whereas the casual, less confident rider may take a longer route to avoid traffic. The experienced bicyclist may be riding up to 25 miles an hour on level and may even be as high as 45 miles an hour on a downgrade, whereas the casual and less confident rider will be riding at speeds between 8 and 12 miles an hour. The experienced and confident rider will take longer trips, but that casual and less confident rider is going to be taking trips between 1 and 5 miles in length. And when you think back to the fact that more than half of the trips in the US are 3 miles in length, you can see how that's a very bikeable distance. And if people felt safe riding, then we might see a significant mode shift. Some other characteristics of bicyclists, and this came from a survey where the respondents could only pick one answer. Now, it may be that you might, for your primary reason, bike because it's fun and it's recreational, but along the way, you might stop at the grocery store to pick up that item you needed for dinner and ride by a friend's house on the way home. So you might have multiple purposes for the trip, but just so you have an understanding, yes, recreation did come up top on the list. And someone might ask, why do we send transportation funds for a recreational facility? Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever gone for a Sunday drive? Or have you ever taken a trip to go to the movie or go to the mountains or go to the beach? These are also recreational trips. We do a lot of recreational transportation. So it doesn't exclude bicyclist travel just because there is a recreational aspect to it. Certainly, there are other purposes that have been identified for exercise and health, to go home, running errands, visiting friends, commuting to school and work. I find the next to the last answer interesting. To go for a bike ride is the reason we're biking. I don't know if that's different from recreation or not, but I found that to be an interesting answer. But this gives us a sense of the fact that there's not just one reason for being on a bike. It's not just for a lark. There might be some other purposes to it. And then some preferences that bicyclists have. Certainly to feel safe, to feel secure, all bicyclists, from the experienced and confident down to the novice, are going to prefer motor vehicle traffic that's at a lower speed, and certainly lower volume traffic, and lower percentage of trucks. And then when we think about the behaviors, oh, one more, and fewer lanes of travel. The behaviors, sometimes bicyclists get accused of being scofflaws. I think a lot of us on the roadways, whether we're motor vehicle drivers or bicyclists, tend to skirt the laws to some degree. You know, we've been known to roll through stops and speed and commit other traffic violations. Bicyclists are human too. And very often the things that we do in the public right-of-way, we have in a sense set traps for bicyclists. And so when I see a situation where there's perhaps a lot of violations happening, I'm going to ask myself, have I created a trap in the infrastructure, whether there's a connectivity issue that's encouraging people to ride the wrong way, or if there's a really long signal cycle length and there's no traffic there, you know, are bicyclists having to wait a long time in the hot weather, because certainly they have a different experience on the roadway than someone who's sitting in an air-conditioned car with the music playing, and the driver simply has to flex and extend their ankle to make the car go and stop, whereas the bicyclist has to put in some effort and energy to get up to speed, and with each stop sign they now have to lose all of that energy and effort they put out to get their momentum and start all over again. So thinking about what we're doing, and very often I think we put stop signs where we should have yield signs instead. In some states and in many cities, they have instituted what's known as the Idaho stop law, Idaho being the first state to implement it statewide, where a bicyclist is allowed to treat a stop sign as a yield sign and a signal as a stop sign. So if they approach a stop sign and can slow down and see that it's clear, they can proceed through the intersection. If they approach a signal that's red, they can stop, but if the intersection is clear, they can proceed without having to wait for the entire cycle, particularly when that cycle might not change for the bicyclist, depending on what sort of detection is available. Bicyclists will certainly be slower on the uphill. The longer the uphill is, the slower they'll get. So that might contribute to how we think about where we place bike lanes. Maybe we don't need bike lanes on both sides of the street, because on the downhill, they're speeding up, but on the uphill, they're slowing down. So thinking about the conditions and the operations of the bicyclist and how we choose facilities is important. In many places, it's legal to ride on the sidewalk, and I did not check to see if that's so in Florida, but even if it's not legal, very often people will do it because they feel safer there. They're further away from traffic. However, in certain conditions, this can be the most dangerous thing that a bicyclist can do. Consider a motorist who's approaching the street from a side road or a driveway. And as they approach, they see that there's no pedestrians on the sidewalk. And so then they turn their focus to finding a gap in traffic and turning onto the roadway. Now, the bicyclist, who can travel much faster on the sidewalk, may be much further away from that conflict point. And while the motorist is looking for gaps in traffic, they approach the car. The motorist then pulls out into or in front of the bicyclist and causes a crash. So cycling on the sidewalk can be a concern, particularly where we have driveways and conflict points. In terms of the crash records we have across the US, in 2015, we had 818 reported deaths due to bicycle crashes, and an estimated value of 45,000 injured. The cyclists accounted for 2.3% of all the traffic fatalities in the country, but they only made up 1% of the trips across the country. And if you think about that further, the trips are probably a lot shorter. So if we were talking about miles traveled, the percentage that bicyclists travel as compared to motor vehicles is much smaller. Certainly bicyclists are overrepresented in our crash data. And our crash data for bicyclists is somewhat suspect. In many cases, a crash for a bicyclist is not recorded in statewide or national statistics unless it's a crash with a moving motor vehicle. But there are other types of crashes that can happen. If a bicyclist is traveling past parked cars and the driver opens the car door in front of the bicyclist, first the bicyclist has hit this narrow edge of the car door at 10, 12 miles per hour. That certainly is painful. Then they fall off the bike and hit the pavement. That's painful too. And if they happen to fall into a travel lane, they might get run over by another motor vehicle. And it's only at that point that it would be a recordable crash, because at that point they were hit by a moving motor vehicle. Getting hit by the door of a parked car doesn't count. And so very often our crash statistics don't tell the entire story. Just to look at some of the trends that we have had over the 10 years of data available. Over that time period, total traffic fatalities decreased by 18%. And you'll see in these two tables that we've got them side by side, but the scale is different. Certainly, there's much fewer number of bicycle crashes, but we are seeing an upward trend over that 10-year period where bicycle crashes have increased by 6%. Similarly, while total traffic injuries have decreased by 5%, bicyclist injuries have increased by 2%. And here's some data for the state of Florida, where you are showing that you have about 5.5% of your traffic fatalities are bicyclists. You're averaging between 125 and 150 bicycle fatalities every year. And so we've talked about the crash data and the numbers of deaths and injuries that are experienced, but how do we truly measure safety? Certainly, because we can count the injuries and fatalities, that's one way. Certainly being alive and whole when you arrive at your destination is important. But more than that, being calm and confident, feeling like you would want to take a bike ride again, feeling like that you can travel home the same way you came without putting your life at risk is an important consideration. I had an experience just last week where a garbage truck passed me within 2 feet. And that seems like plenty of space. You know, they didn't touch me, certainly, but I had thoughts of falling over and ending up under this garbage truck and what might have happened with just a minor slip of the handlebars. That gave me pause and made me think about what I was doing and how I could have prevented that and what I could have done differently. And certainly if there'd been more separation between me and that garbage truck, I would have felt calmer and more confident about my experience on the ride. There's an interesting study that was done in the city of Portland, and I hear that there are other locations that have done similar research. The statistics or the numbers might be slightly different depending on the locale, but the overall information that we're getting is pretty consistent, where in Portland, they found that 1% of their traveling public classified themselves as a strong and fearless bicyclist, where 6% considered themselves to be enthusiastic and confident. And then there was this big portion of the population, 60%, that said they were interested but concerned. And I would suspect that those who are interested but concerned are probably not getting on their bikes and riding on the street. I would suspect that if they are getting on a bike, they're using more of a recreational trail or a shared use path. And then finally, there was 33% who said, no way, no how, I'm not getting on a bike. And I would suspect there that if there were different types of facilities available, if they could see safe bicycling happening in their community, it's possible that we might even convert some of them to a different mode choice. The 1% and the 6% are probably already biking on the road to some degree or another. So what is causing some of those choices? Well, it might be the level of traffic stress. And there's a methodology that was developed by the Mineta Transportation Institute, and they've used it to classify the streets in whole communities. For example, in San Jose, California, they've classified every street according to level of traffic stress, where level of traffic stress 1 would be suitable for almost everyone, including children. Level of traffic stress 2 is suitable for most adult cyclists. Level of traffic stress 3 is where the traffic stress is increasing. And then finally, level of traffic stress 4 is only suitable for that strong and fearless rider. And this just shows some of the characteristics of each of those levels of traffic stress. Where level of traffic stress 1 has more physical separation from traffic, or the traffic is very low volume and the speeds are at 25 miles an hour or less. The bike lanes are generous in their widths. The intersections are easy, and this is comfortable for children. Level of traffic stress 2 has slightly higher speeds, 30 miles per hour. The bike lanes might not be as wide. You might have more complex intersections to cross, but this is comfortable for most adults. Level of traffic stress 3 has higher speeds, and this is what's comfortable for most current US riders. And remember, when we were talking about the Portland study, maybe only 1 to 7% of our population are currently riding on the street. So that's probably indicative of what most of our traditional bike facilities that we've been building in the US are. Level of traffic stress 4 doesn't necessarily have a dedicated bike facility. The speeds are much higher at 40 miles per hour, and this is where the strong and fearless riders will be the only riders who are out there. So just something to take away from this. Most current riders in the US are riding at level of traffic stress 3. This is what's typical of the US bike facilities. But what's typical, or what's comfortable for most adults, what's more likely to capture that 60% of the population that's interested but concerned, is going to be level of traffic stress 2. And this is what's typical of the bike facilities in the Netherlands. And just a comment about the Netherlands bike facilities. They did not have these facilities 20, 30 years ago. This is something that they changed in their country. And over time, they were able to create a whole different context and climate and make a much wider option available for bicyclists. This is a quote that comes from the current AASHTO guide for development of bicycle facilities, where it says, in order for this group, the casual and less confident rider, to regularly choose bicycling as a mode of transportation, a physical network of visible, convenient, and well-designed bicycle facilities is needed. And just a note on the AASHTO guide, there's a new one that should be coming out maybe in the next year. And I think we're going to see a lot more information and a lot more expanded detail on designing different types of facilities. So look forward to that. I maybe wouldn't invest in the current AASHTO bike guide just yet if you don't have it. Borrow a copy if you need to. But the message is still the same. If we want to give more options to more people, we need to think differently about how we're designing our facilities. And one of the key pictures is that well-connected network. Not every corridor needs to be all things to all people, but certainly bicyclists need to be able to get across town into the destinations that they want to go, whether it's library, schools, shopping, employment. And if there's corridors, creating that well-connected, comfortable bike network you're more likely to have a facility that can be used by everyone. I'd like to review some core safety concepts for designing for bicyclists. First of all, it's difficult sometimes to get the data we'd like to have to make a quantitative evaluation of what we're designing, but we do know what contributes to or detracts from the safety and the feeling of safety and comfort that a bicyclist might experience. And so keeping these forefront in our minds as we're evaluating our public rights of way in our streets, we can diagnose where those risk points are and think about what countermeasures might reduce the risk that is experienced. The first key safety concept is speed. Certainly, speed is going to contribute to the reaction time of motorists approaching a bicyclist, or even a bicyclist approaching an intersection at the speed they're traveling. And the higher the speeds are, the more distance it's going to take for the motorist to brake and stop and avoid an accident or a crash with a bicyclist. But more than that, thinking about the different modes of travel, a motorist has that armored vehicle around them to keep them secure. They have airbags and seatbelts. A bicyclist may have a helmet. And more than that, the bicycle itself might become a projectile in a crash, where the bicyclist could be further injured by the fact that their bicyclist is flying through the air with them. This study that I'm showing is related to pedestrians more specifically, but I would suggest that other than the helmet and the bike, bicyclists and pedestrians are very similar. They don't have the seatbelts, they don't have the airbags, they don't have the vehicle that's surrounding and protecting them in a crash. And we find that at 20 miles per hour, 9 out of 10 pedestrians who are in a crash with a motor vehicle will survive. However, at 40 miles an hour, 1 out of 10 pedestrians who are in a crash with a motor vehicle will survive. So 9 out of 10 pedestrians in that crash at that speed will die. And this is pretty significant when we're thinking about the speeds that motor vehicles are traveling on our roadway. And we can think about, are there options to change the context of the roadway and have slower speeds? Or maybe there's an alternate corridor that can be used. Or understanding that the speeds are a significant risk, providing more separation for the bicyclist from the moving motor vehicles. Next is the number of lanes, particularly at intersections. The number of lanes can make that intersection very forbidding and difficult to traverse. We've got, well, we call them different things in different states. I've heard them called kitten tracks and turkey tracks, but the dotted extension lines through the intersection. We've got a lot of those for the motorist. And if I'm a bicyclist looking across an intersection that large, it might be difficult for me to figure out where my lane is. And more than that, if I'm trying to make a left turn as a bicyclist, that could be very complicated. I might choose to function as a pedestrian at this location. The strong and fearless bicyclist might be merging across 3 lanes of traffic to get to that left turn lane where they're at greater risk. And so thinking about how the number of lanes contribute to the safety of the bicyclist and what we can do at the intersection to reduce that risk is important. This picture was taken from my hotel room overlooking this intersection in St. Petersburg. And you can see where simply adding a bike lane may not be enough to provide something that's comfortable for the casual, less confident rider. The next safety concept is visibility and conspicuity. Certainly, it's important for the motorist to be able to see and recognize where those conflict points are with the motorist or with the bicyclist, and for the bicyclist to be aware of when motor vehicles are going to be crossing their path. And nighttime conditions can be a huge concern very often the street lighting we have on a roadway is lighting the street, but it doesn't adequately light the area where the bicyclist might be traveling, in the bike lane near the shoulder, or maybe the intersections have a large luminaire that casts a glow over the center of the intersection, but it doesn't illuminate the crossing conflict points. And then we can use traffic control devices sometimes to highlight the conflict points where the motor vehicle and the bicyclist are crossing paths, trying to raise awareness, make both the bicyclist and the motorist more watchful of those locations. Traffic volume and composition certainly contribute to the feeling of safety and comfort. On this residential street, you don't need any particular facilities to make it a comfortable facility for biking. However, this photo that was taken in Laredo, Texas, you can see where the large vehicles and the high number of vehicles traveling on the roadway is going to make it a very uncomfortable place to travel. Laredo happens to be the largest land port in the US, and they have something like 80% trucks, which is quite the sight to behold. And many of the warehouses are a few miles beyond where the last bus stop is. So if someone doesn't have a car, they have to resort to walking or biking to get from their home south of the border to the warehouse location where they work. And I've seen people riding in this traffic, even against traffic, on freeway ramps, trying to get to and from work. I would not classify them as the strong and confident and fearless rider. More so, they're the desperate riders. They are doing it because they have no other choice. This is their form of transportation, but we certainly haven't served them well. And then intersection conflict points or driveway conflict points. These are where the motor vehicle and the bicyclist are having to cross paths to continue on their journey, and looking at ways to reduce the risk of those conflict points, whether it's reducing the number of conflict points through access management or changing the type of intersection we're using from a traditional intersection to a roundabout, or using traffic control to highlight and make them more conspicuous. Proximity is just as I described, the fear I felt with that garbage truck passing me. You know, motor vehicles can pass quite closely to bicyclists without feeling any discomfort, but the bicyclist certainly feels that discomfort. And when we can provide separation, even on a high volume, busy street, we can provide a lot of comfort for the bicyclist. Bike control is a term I like to use to describe the condition of the pavement or the things that we put in the pavement. Sometimes it's just the debris that brushes over. I like to use the term road crocodiles or road alligators, and you probably have real road crocodiles and alligators in Florida, but I think of those tire remnants that are left behind by the trucks, and so often they end up in the shoulder or the bike lane. But the sand and debris that can end up in the bike lane is a concern, but also things like the lip of the gutter or utilities or pavement condition. There was a city where I was riding in their bike lane. It was a perfectly good bike lane. There had been some utility work done on that street, and the utility line was cut longitudinally down the center of the bike lane, right where my bicycle tire would be. And so I'm riding on a bike with a 1-inch wide tire, and there's a seam that's making it difficult to travel. Whereas if that utility cut had been in the motor vehicle lane, I don't think that the motorist would have hardly noticed it. But it certainly was an issue for me as a bicyclist. And finally, the last issue is connectivity. If I'm riding along in a nice, comfortable bike facility, and then it simply ends, and I'm falling off the face of the earth, essentially, then what do I do? So often, because we don't have the connectivity, we find ourselves stranded in places that are not comfortable or not safe given the skill level of the bicyclist. And this can be a challenge because as we're developing these facilities, we can't necessarily install them all at once, but it's important to be thoughtful about the transitions, at least providing a few extra cues at the beginning or the end of the facility to try to help someone transition over to where they should be as they continue their journey. And I've seen some things that I think are a misapplication of some of the signage that we have. We have signs that say bike lane begins, bike lane ends, and so often I have seen locations where along the corridor, they'll have a lovely bike lane between the intersections, and at every intersection on the corridor, the bike lane ends. And on the far side of the intersection, the bike lane begins again. And while that's true, I think we've treated the bicyclists poorly by letting them make a free-for-all through the intersection without providing any sort of continuity or even a few shared lane markings through the intersection to help them progress. The image I'm showing here comes from one of our recent FHWA guides. It has a number of case studies on measuring connectivity of a multimodal network. And in this study in Contra Costa, they looked at all of the streets where bicyclists could ride, where all the bicycle facilities were, and looked at how far someone would have to travel out of direction to get across that freeway corridor and to continue on their journey. And so on the left, they looked at all facilities that were available to bicyclists. But on the right, they looked at only the comfortable bike facilities and looked at how far out of direction you'd have to travel to remain on a comfortable route. And so this is an interesting measure of looking at network connectivity. And there are other tips and tools in that guidance document that I'll provide a reference to you later. So just to review, these key safety factors are speed, number of lanes, visibility, traffic volume and composition, conflict points, proximity to moving motor vehicles, how well we can control the bicycle, what that pavement condition is, and connectivity of the network. So when we're thinking about our streets, we talk about complete streets, and really what a complete street is a place where we've provided space for all modes of travel. You can see in this photo, we've got a bus off in the distance, we've got a bike lane, we have a comfortable place for pedestrians to walk and to congregate, there's businesses, there's motor vehicle travel, motor vehicle parking. Everybody is included in this space. I'd like you to observe this photo for a moment and identify all of the bike traffic control devices and facilities that we've installed on this corridor. Can you see them? If this is a facility that doesn't have anything specific for bicyclists, but because of the context, because it is a place where you expect slower speed and where there's street frontage that's closer to the roadway, it changes the context and behavior of everyone using it and makes it a comfortable facility for bicyclists. Alternatively, we have this corridor in Las Vegas. Certainly, motor vehicles rule on this corridor, and yet we still have a hardy bicyclist out there in the middle of the road trying to get to where they need to go. The risks are going to be higher in this context. So we have to ask ourselves, are we going to provide space on the street or provide space away from the street? Or are we going to slow traffic down in some way and adjust the context so that bicyclists can mix with traffic safely? And instead of asking ourselves, where can we put bicyclists? This was sort of the question when I was a novice designer working for a state agency. We'd focus all of the attention on motor vehicle volumes and queue lengths and storage for the intersections. And at the end of all of that, well, if this was an identified corridor for a bike lane, we might squeeze in a bike lane, but no more thought than that. And we might tack on some sidewalks and throw in a detail for curb ramp. But we really didn't think in great detail about the placement of some of those facilities and how to make them suitable for all types of users. I think the industry has changed over the years. I think people have a greater understanding now of what all the modes need and trying to make it safer for all modes. So instead of asking, where can we tack on a bike facility, we should be asking ourselves, how can we better design our facilities to be inclusive of bicyclists as well as pedestrians? So in terms of the design policies and where we are now, just for reference, the federal law says we must consider bike facilities where appropriate with new construction and reconstruction, and consider the safety and contiguous routes for bicyclists in our plans and projects. But I'd ask you this, what does consider mean? Have we simply said, well, this is not a safe facility, so we're not going to put any bike facilities on it. I've considered it, check the box, I'm done. Or have we actually developed alternatives? Have we looked at providing an on-street facility as compared to an off-street facility versus an alternate corridor? Have we really thought about how a bicyclist can travel through the route that we may be considering? In 2010, our Secretary of Transportation, who at that time was Ray LaHood, signed a policy in which it said every transportation agency, including the Department of Transportation, has the responsibility to improve conditions and opportunities for walking and bicycling, to integrate walking and bicycling into their transportation system. And I think integrate is perhaps a better description of how we should be tackling this, as opposed to simply considering. This policy had a number of recommended actions that I'll share with you here. First of all, considering bicycling as equal with other modes. And that's hard to do, but so often I see situations like in a work zone where there might be 2 motor vehicle lanes and a solitary bike lane, but what gets shut down? The bike lane. Where for the motorist, maybe it would be a mile out of direction that wouldn't be too difficult. For the bicyclist, that mile out of direction takes a lot of effort. And so thinking about where our priorities are is important. Ensuring transportation choices for all ages and abilities, especially children. Remember, children are usually in that level of traffic stress 1, and are we providing them an option to travel? Go beyond minimum design standards. If we start putting in a minimum or less than minimum parking lane and a minimal bike lane with a minimal motor vehicle lane, and we start adding those up across the corridor, we can end up with something that's uncomfortable for everyone. We need to be a little bit cautious. Maybe if we have to compromise on the parking lane, we can put a little more space in the bike lane or provide a buffer. And maybe we compromise the motor vehicle lane to get some more sidewalk space. But if we do minimum upon minimum, we end up with something that maybe is not desirable. And maybe that's where we think about how not every corridor is suitable for all modes. Maybe we focus on the heavy vehicles and the commuter traffic on one corridor, but we make sure there's a nice parallel corridor where we can create that bike boulevard where there's a whole different context. Integrate bicycle accommodation on bridges. When I think about the bridge in my town, I live in what is best described as a whistle stop in Kansas. Most people think mountains in Colorado. Well, I'm out on the plains. And when this town was first established, there wasn't a freeway, of course, and we were all on the north side of the railroad tracks. Well, now, in time, the railroad has been, or the freeway has been constructed with our freeway interchange and the bridge, and other houses have been built on the south side of the railroad tracks. That bridge has been here for 60, 70 years. And it was not built to accommodate pedestrians or bicyclists. It was simply meant for cars. And at the time, there was no pedestrian or bicycle traffic across that bridge. But now that we have a town that is on both sides of that freeway, I frequently see pedestrians and bicyclists walking across the bridge. So when we're building structures that have a very long design life, we want to think about what might happen before the service life of that bridge is up. Very often when we put in a freeway interchange, what pops up first is a gas station or a truck stop. Maybe over time we'll get a grocery store or a Home Depot. And now we suddenly have a whole bunch of trip generators where there might be a demand for pedestrian travel. Collecting data on bicycle trips is important. And sometimes it's difficult because if a bicyclist doesn't feel safe, they're not going to be taking the trip. So we have to be a little bit creative sometimes in trying to infer where those desire lines may be. Removing the snow is probably not so much of an issue in Florida, but certainly doing appropriate maintenance on our bike facilities so that they're traversable. And using maintenance projects where we're doing resurfacing as an opportunity to rethink our cross-section. Maybe our travel lanes don't need to be 12 feet wide. Maybe we can compromise there to provide a little bit of a buffer for bicyclists. So how do we evaluate our needs for bicycle travel? Certainly data collection is going to help us. In Colorado, our ped bike coordinator for the state DOT was able to collaborate with Kaiser and obtain some bike counters. And by using those bike counters on some of the bike corridors, she was able to find out that there were upwards of 200 bicyclists a day using these corridors during snowstorms. And by sharing that information with maintenance, she was able to give them a motivation to, oh, maybe we need to clear that bikeway sooner than we would originally consider doing it. Their assumption was bicyclists aren't traveling in the snow. But by having a little data to demonstrate that bicyclists are continuing to commute in bad weather, it changed their thinking and their priorities. So certainly identifying high crash locations, corridors or areas, but more than that, identifying locations with a potential for crash, because the numbers are relatively small and bicycle crashes are going to be a little bit more dispersed. It might be difficult to anticipate where our riskiest corridors are simply by looking at existing crash numbers. Certainly using those numbers or those risk factors that we've identified to prioritize and identify the appropriate treatments or countermeasures. And as I mentioned, the crashes are going to be more dispersed. It's not going to capture those near misses where someone almost had a crash, but the public might be able to provide a lot of good information. They have a sense of where they feel safe riding and where they don't, or where there's misconnections in the network. So reaching out to the public to gather more information can be helpful. This is an example of the data that is publicly available on the internet for Dallas, the Dallas metropolitan area, where we have a heat map that shows where all the bicycle and pedestrian crashes have happened in their community. And then you can also look at the point locations for those crashes as well. So that's certainly data that they can use to help prioritize where they're going to add treatments to reduce risk. Now let's talk about some of the evaluation tools that we have and how they work for evaluating bicycle facilities. So I'll talk about the Highway Safety Manual, the Bicycle Intersection Safety Indices, the Highway Capacity Manual, road safety audits, and a tool that we call Bike Safe. The Highway Safety Manual has certainly been a revolutionary change in safety analysis, where before, it was simply a matter of, did I follow the standards? Well, then it should be safe. But when we want to apply a flexible approach and make compromises here and there, it's hard to know at what point have I crossed the line, where have I increased the risk too much. So the Highway Safety Manual gives us a predictive way of measuring safety, where we can do a very long calculation that includes key features for a roadway like traffic volume, lane width, and so forth, and get a predicted number of crashes, which is referred to the safety performance function, or usually the letter N. Now, just for your information on how the number of bike crashes is predicted using this methodology. N for bicyclists, or the number of crashes of bicyclists, is simply a proportion of all motor vehicle crashes that are predicted for a roadway. And that proportion is very small, as expected, but it does not tell us anything about the characteristics of the bikeway or how many bicyclists may be traveling on that bikeway. It's simply a rough number of the predicted number of bike crashes. And it's not going to be very helpful in telling us whether we've applied the appropriate countermeasure. And furthermore, it's only available for urban and suburban segments. We don't have any sort of tool for predicting bike crashes on rural segments. Furthermore, once you've calculated your predicted number of crashes, you can go to the CMS clearinghouse, or the Crash Modification Clearinghouse, to see what countermeasures might tend to increase or decrease crashes. If you have a CMF greater than 1, you would be increasing crashes. You multiply it by your predicted number of crashes. If you have a CMF less than 1, you're reducing the number of crashes. Now, I've pulled a few of the CMFs related to the countermeasure install bike lanes here. And you can see where maybe we have a problem. For all types of crashes, in the study that was done by Jensen, he found that all types of crashes are going to increase by 5% by the addition of a bike lane, whereas Chen found that will reduce all types of crashes by 6%. So we don't have really strong numbers that tell us one way or the other what's going to happen. And some of the different research reports, you'll find that they have a standard deviation of something like 0.3. So you can get a swing of 30% plus or minus on your predicted numbers. Now, if you look a little further here, if we look at specifically the vehicle-bicycle crashes, Chen has two different numbers. In one case, I found that he was increasing bike motor vehicle crashes by 50%. In another case, it was 28%. Now, this depended on what sort of control was happening at the signalized intersection. But if I'm looking at those numbers and if I'm not fully informed on the research behind them or the meaning of the safety performance function, I'm going to say, wait a minute, why would I ever install a bike lane if I'm going to increase bike vehicle crashes by 50%? Something to remember, first of all, is that's a raw number of crashes. It doesn't say anything about the number of bicyclists who may have been using the facility before and after. And you look at some of the studies and where they were based, you can infer some different things. Some of the studies from Denmark, they do see an increase in the number of crashes, but I would suspect in Denmark, they also saw a rise in the number of biking facilities. Now, if you remember the picture I showed you of the bike lane in Florida, I know one of the research studies that was done in Florida where they showed a reduction in crashes by adding a bike lane. But I would also ask myself, did they actually see an increase in the number of bicyclists, or was it simply the same bicyclists using the facility before and after because it was an uncomfortable facility? And because we've now provided an on-street space for them, we have improved safety for those bicyclists who were currently using the facility. And these crash modification factors don't, again, tell us, well, was it a 4-foot bike lane or a 6-foot bike lane? and was there a buffer, and were the intersections treated well? These are all factors that we want to consider. So unfortunately, the Highway Safety Manual is not going to be a helpful tool in the near term, but there is a lot of research going on right now to refine the tool, and stay tuned, because in the future, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to use it to help us really refine our designs and make some informed decisions. One tool that we do have available that can be helpful now is the Bicyclist Intersection Safety Indices. And this is a publication put out by FHWA. It's available for free on our website. And using some very simple data, you give each movement at each intersection a score of 1, which would be the safest, ranging up to 6, which would be the least safe. Some of the data that goes into this score would be the traffic volume, the number of lanes on the cross streets, what sort of lanes you have at the intersection, speed limits. They're not even asking for speed, just speed limits, whether there's parking, and what sort of traffic control you have at the intersection. All fairly simple data to collect. It's something that maybe an intern over summer could look at a corridor or at several corridors in your community, collect the data, and you could come up with some rankings to help you make some decisions about where to prioritize treatment. Just a few comments about the Highway Capacity Manual. Certainly the Highway Capacity Manual for much of its history has been very autofocused, but in the last 2 editions, it has included pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit, and level of service for each of those modes. Now, in the first edition, there were some problems because the first edition was still thinking of a bicyclist like a motorist, but there's other factors that contribute to the bicyclist quality of ride beyond just travel speed and intersection delay. So they've included this bicyclist perception score that captures a lot of things that we've been talking about, like motor vehicle volume, the percent of heavy trucks, number of lanes, how wide is the outside lane, whether there's medians or curbs, access control, pavement condition, and the speed of the motor vehicle. All of those things get rolled into that score and can give us a level of service for bicyclists. So if we're looking at a facility where we want to encourage pedestrian bicycle travel, we might make some compromises on level of service for motor vehicles. I'm thinking about the fact that at peak hour or hours might be 2 to 4 hours a day, but have we made something to save travel time for motor vehicles? Have we ended up with something that is terribly uncomfortable for pedestrians and bicyclists? And are we willing to make some compromises for that portion of the day where maybe there might be some delay? Another tool that we have for assessing safety is the road safety audit process, which is a formal study where a group of independent professionals and multidisciplinary background, you might have planners and designers, but also law enforcement officers or the school district transportation director or a bicycle advocate participate in for an afternoon or a couple of days to review a corridor, make a site visit, walk the corridor, and identify opportunities for improvement. We have this tool called the RSA prompt list that's specific for bike safety that includes a series of questions that can be useful in steering the discussion or helping identify where there might be some opportunities to improve safety for bicyclists. This is something that someone could also use if they're sitting at their desk reviewing a project to help with the quality assessment of that project. This tool also includes the bikeability checklist. And this is more of a survey format that you could use with the community or members of the public to help tease out the information from them about where they feel safe or where there's opportunities for improvement on a bike corridor. Now, how do we select countermeasures for bike facilities? We certainly have design guides available to us. And there was a lot of push at FHWA to clarify our position on being flexible in our design. You know, if you look at the AASHTO Green Book, there's a lot of discussion about context and trade-offs and flexibility, but we wanted to put out a memorandum out in 2013 to clarify our position on using design flexibility to accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians better in our roadways. It provides support for taking a flexible approach, and the memorandum specifically cited other resources that we can look to beyond the AASHTO Green Book. There's the AASHTO Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities, but there's also ITE's Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares, and that is a publication that's free and online. I don't think I have the reference for that one in this presentation, but if you simply Google that name, you'll find it. There's also the Urban Bikeway Design Guide that was produced by NACTO. And since that time, we've produced a number of other publications that also provide a lot of information and detail on designing for bike facilities. In 2015, FHWA produced the Separated Bike Lanes Planning and Design Guide. And this was because there wasn't much discussion in the AASHTO Bike Guide about what we're calling separated bike lanes. You also may have heard them referred to cycle tracks or protected bike lanes. But the limited information in the AASHTO Bike Guide just didn't cover the topic well, and there was a lot of interest, particularly as people observed the application of these types of facilities in Europe. Also in 2015, Massachusetts DOT developed a separated bike lanes guide that takes it even a little bit further, and it's the only guidance that I know of in the US that addresses protected intersections, and that's a great resource that you can get to online as well. In 2016, we came out with a document, Achieving Multimodal Networks, Applying Flexibility and Reducing Conflicts. In 2017, we issued Small Towns and Rural Multimodal Networks, and that has some great tips on some simple fixes to something as minor as how we address shoulder striping at a rural intersection to improve it for bike safety, which is something that would be no cost if it was done in the course of a resurfacing project. And then just this year, I mentioned this document before, Measuring Multimodal Network Connectivity, which is a great tool for suggesting different ways to measure how well our network is working. And this is a website that is managed by the University of North Carolina, our Pedestrian Bicycle Information Center. It's called pedbikesafe.org. There's both pedestrian and bicycle components. Here we're looking at the bicycle module, where you can look at background information, analysis tools, statistics about bicycle travel. There's a list of countermeasures, and you can enter in some simple data about a project and what you're hoping to achieve, and it will give you a table of potential countermeasures that you might want to investigate, and then you can click on any of those countermeasures and find some more information. And then finally, in terms of traffic control devices, I mentioned that they're changing rapidly. The traffic control devices in the current MUTCD do not cover the range of options we have available for improving bicycle facilities. FHWA has a process where we allow for experimentation. If you come up with the best new idea on a traffic control device, if you'll work with us, you can put it in place, and with some evaluation before and after, it might become the new nationwide standard in time. And so this table is a really useful table where you can see which traffic control devices are under experiment, where other cities or states are using them. You can see which ones have received enough support that they've received interim approval, So you simply need to let us know that you're using them and maybe collect a little before and after data. And then we also have some interpretations and clarifications on how best to use some of the traffic control devices that we already have available to us. So I have provided the reference to you on this page, and it's one I refer to regularly. One thing I'll mention is there's been one change, and the website hasn't been quite updated yet, but I understand that the two-stage turn box has moved into the interim approval column in the last month or so, and so I'll be updating the slide as soon as the website is updated. But I want you to dare to experiment, because we don't know everything we'd like to know. Evaluate your locations, consider where the risks are, think about how you might treat those risks. Use something that maybe isn't in the standard MUTCD and see if you can improve safety for bicyclists. And then once you've installed something, keep an eye on it and see how it's working. There might be a few minor tweaks that you need to include. So here are all the references that I've talked about today. I will mention the very last one on the list is that one with the MUTCD traffic control devices. Now at this point, we have a couple of more poll questions, and so I'll turn it over to Anthony to share those with us.
Okay, the next poll question for the audience today is, FHWA only endorses this guideline for the design of bicycle facilities. Please select one. AASHTO policy on geometric design of highways and streets, AASHTO guide for development of bicycle facilities, or FHWA supports a flexible approach and endorses many approaches. All right, we will close this poll and share the results. Looks like we have 13% of the audience picking choice A, the policy on geometric design of highways and streets. 16% of the audience picking choice B, the guide for the development of bicycle facilities, and 71% of the audience picking choice C, FHWA supports a flexible approach and endorses many resources. And a final poll question. The current edition of the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, contains the only allowable traffic control devices. True or false? All right, we will close this poll and share the results. We have 24% of the audience picking choice A, saying that it is true that the MUTCD contains the only allowable traffic control devices, and 76% of the audience saying that that is not true. There are traffic control devices allowed that are not in the MUTCD.
Sounds like most of you were listening and got the correct answers. FHWA does support a flexible approach and has endorsed other resources such as NACTO and IDE, as well as some other publications that we've issued as resources to help us better design bicycle facilities. And then because it takes a while for the MUTCD to be updated, we do have traffic control devices that have been identified as interim approvals that with a few extra steps, you are welcome to use on your facilities. In fact, If you look at our websites, you might find that many of those traffic control devices have already been approved for use in your state or your community. And in addition to that, if you develop a new tool or approach using traffic control devices, there is a mechanism where you can do experimentation and put those in place on the ground, on the street, and see how they work. So there are options to go above and beyond what the MUTCD currently has. So just a few summary review thoughts on our discussion today. I hope you'll take away some of these key messages. And remember that 1 to 5 mile trip is typical for the casual rider, and 50% of all trips are less than 3 miles. So we have an opportunity. Most of the historically designed or traditionally designed bike facilities are levels of traffic stress 3, but what's going to be comfortable for most adult bicyclists is going to be something that's more in the lines of level of traffic stress 2. We can use our good judgment as transportation professionals to evaluate a facility and find those risk points and apply countermeasures to reduce risk. Those risk points include speed, the number of lanes, visibility or conspicuity, traffic volume and composition, conflict points, proximity of the bicyclist to motor vehicle traffic, how well the pavement condition contributes to the bicyclist's ability to control their bike, and connectivity of the bike network. So remember, measuring safety is not just, did I survive my journey? Did I get home uninjured? But did I get home without having to peel my knuckles off of the handlebars? Did I feel like I would want to take that journey again? So with that, I appreciate this opportunity to be able to talk with you, and I'm happy to field any questions that you may have. Remember, we'll be getting into more detail in the subsequent sessions on any of the countermeasures and design features, but I'm happy to talk about what we've discussed today or any other questions you may have.
Sure, we have 2 questions in the chat related to the presentation. One, real quick, the presentation. There's always a question about where can we get the slides, which is good because that means that people are interested and liked the presentation. I think particularly the last couple of slides there, all those resources are just a great place to have all those together. The slides for the presentation are actually in the handout pod of the GoToWebinar widget that you have on your screen right now, so everybody can download the presentation from there if you like. Alternatively, you can follow the hyperlink on the email invitation that got you here in the first place. There is a link to the Tampa Bay Traffic Safety Academy webpage. If you follow that to the, there's a link to the Tampa Bay Traffic Safety webpage. You follow the link to the Safety Academy, and the presentations will be posted there. It's not up there yet. We have it in the handout pod first. And the recording of today's presentation will be there as well. We had a comment, or kind of a question comment maybe, regarding the Netherlands, Germany model, saying that, we have a lot to learn from there. I'll just read the comment in its entirety. It says, I'm a bicycle commuter and construction engineer with the city of Tampa. I ride about 9 miles to work. I have the opportunity to use bike paths along Causeway Boulevard that instead rode through a neighborhood with little to no traffic. To me, this is a far better option, avoiding truck and other fast traffic. Along US 41, I have no option but to either ride out in the street with traffic in excess of 60 miles per hour or use the sidewalk. Here, the sidewalk is the better option. We need to emulate the model of Netherlands and Germany, etc., and have implemented instead of continuing to merely add unprotected bike lanes to highways. I have ridden in the Netherlands and was amazed how you can ride almost throughout the entire country separated from auto traffic. It is apparent by the number of riders in their system that it does work, and obesity rates happen to be much lower there as well, which might have to do with the bicycling. They probably go to McDonald's a lot less than we do. But I don't know if you have any other comments or additional information about the Netherlands and Germany, the things that we can learn from looking at those that you want to comment on to kind of add on to the comment here that we have a lot to learn from them.
Well, I guess, one thing that came up in a discussion that I was having in the last few weeks was that, really thinking about, the different types of bike riders we have and the comfort levels. It's almost like you need to have two separate bike networks in some respects. One that's suitable for the children and the less confident rider, but also one where the more confident riders feel comfortable as well. And it sounds like what the commenter is describing is something that's not even comfortable for that 1% strong and fearless. Simply adding a bike lane, we haven't done the job. And a lot of what they've done over in the Netherlands and in Denmark and Sweden is they're focusing on a Vision Zero type concept where we really work to reduce speeds, providing more priority, more space for the bicycle mode, really making compromises and saying those modes take higher priority. And it's tough decisions sometimes. Sometimes it takes some political will, and it's going to be an uphill battle, depending on the politicians and the public sentiment in the community. But I think we have an example that we can look to of giving that focus to the other modes. And sometimes it's going to take small steps. If we can get some projects out in a community that show what it can be on one particular corridor, maybe there will be a greater appetite for it in other places and other locations.
Do you know about any communities or any areas, any cities in the United States that are kind of leading the way, beginning to think more like the Netherlands and Germany?
I don't think anything comes to mind that's really gone as far as they have over there, but certainly places like Davis, California, they've been trying out things and being innovative. Downtown Chicago area, there's about 5 places in the country, 6, maybe 6 now, where they've installed protected intersections, which are a huge benefit. Salt Lake City is another one of them. And so I think there's isolated locations and isolated corridors where the thinking is shifting, and they're looking for those opportunities.
And there was a comment about driveways, and I don't know if this is something that you will get into in the other presentations, but for the other 2 topics into more the specifics of it. But the question says, one easy question related to bicycle car crash trends happening in Tampa Bay. What is or are the best ways to address bicycle versus car crashes happening at sidewalks and driveway spots? Drivers usually are looking left when they're making a right turn and hit bicyclists that are traveling along the sidewalk coming from the right. So, I mean, and I know in my evaluation of bicycle crashes, reading the reports and kind of trying to analyze what's happening, it's very common to see upwards of 50% of the bicycle crashes along any given kind of more urban corridor that has a lot of driveways. 50% of the bicycle crashes are bicyclists riding contraflow, which is not illegal in Florida. I mean, you can ride on the sidewalk unless there's a city ordinance stating that the bicyclists must be on the roadway. Bicyclists are allowed in either direction on the sidewalk. And close to 50% of the bicycle crashes are bicyclists traveling contraflow, where you have that divided highway and the driver is looking over their left shoulder, just waiting for a break in traffic. They make the right turn and they never see the bicyclist that's coming from the other direction.
Right, and I think a big part of that is an education aspect. Making sure that people who are biking understand the risk of every driver crossing, so that they're attentive and watchful at those locations, but also the education of driving or riding the bike with traffic. It's something that I know some people have communicated they were actually taught in school that you should ride against traffic. I know that when I was in school, we were taught if you were a pedestrian at a location where there was no sidewalk, you should walk against traffic so you can see traffic coming towards you. And either way, there's been a carryover where people think that biking against traffic is the safer condition when it actually isn't. And so if we can change that message and help people understand it. The other thing to be aware is if we've got people that are immigrating from South America or Mexico, they have been taught in their communities that they should ride against traffic, even if they're on the roadway. And so that's part of the message we need to get out there. Now, if we've got a higher volume driveway, like, the Walmart or a commercial center, that's where I'm going to try to use some design features that make it more conspicuous, whether it's making sure that it's a driveway apron as opposed to having curb returns that look more like an intersection, or putting some green pavement or green markings across the driveway crossing to highlight both for the bicyclist and the motorist that this is a conflict point. These are treatments that, the green pavement I might use in a situation where I know I have bicycle travel happening on the corridor. I might even use, if there's enough sidewalk width that I can start, kind of making it bike and pedestrian use and sort of formalize that. Maybe I'll put some bike lane pavement messages with the arrow. Maybe having that arrow that is part of that message would help reinforce the idea that if you're the bicyclist, you should be traveling with traffic. And I don't know if that actually would help or not, but it couldn't hurt to have an arrow pointing in the correct direction.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any before and after studies, but I know that some of the low-cost countermeasures that have come out of some of the road safety audits we've done in the Tampa Bay area and otherwise, we've installed on the backs. It's really intended for the bike lanes that are provided out there because, again, it's not illegal to ride on the sidewalk the wrong way. But we've put ride with traffic, kind of like, wrong way looking signs on the backs of speed limit signs along the roadway.
Oh, yeah.
So that the cyclist that is riding, our hope is that, the unintended consequences that a cyclist riding on the sidewalk would see that sign and go, oh, maybe I should be riding. So that if they have a very short commute and they're going one block, they're not going to go out of their way, cross the road, go one block, cross the road again. But, if they're traveling a longer distance, maybe it'll encourage them to ride with traffic because, it puts them in a more visible location for the driveways. In addition to that, we've also at the higher volume driveways have put signs that say "Watch for bikes," because the onus is not just on the cyclist; it's also on the driver to, they're sharing that space there, and it's on both to watch out for each other.
Well, and I was just going to say the very same thing. Having a supplemental sign that has a bike warning symbol, or there's a supplemental placard that you could use on a stop sign that has the word look, and then the arrow that points both ways. Something like that combined with the bike symbol could be useful in reminding motorists that there might be bicyclists on the sidewalk, or even a word message that says bikes on sidewalks, look both ways. Might be helpful to try to call attention to that, particularly where you already have a pattern of behavior of using the sidewalk.
Yeah, we have a number of communities where it's, you've got the beachgoers, and then there's like a Walmart that's 2 blocks away, and everybody rides from the condos down to the Walmart, and it's I don't want to pick on Walmart, but just any location like that, the restaurants, the shops, whatever's happening out there where, it's just a very, very, very heavy bicycle corridors. I wouldn't want to set a precedent to install those types of things everywhere, but certainly the locations where you're having the patterns and you're having the behavior, those are helpful. We have another comment that has come in. There is a chicken and egg scenario going on. My area is terrible for bikes, so people do not ride because it is too dangerous. A bicycle lane on a 45-mile-per-hour road is rarely used because of the fear of a rear-end crash, so data doesn't show any bike use. How is this taken into account? More people would use bikes if they felt safe, but it seems bikes are always taking the back seat. Not sure if this fits into the discussion, but it is the biggest problem in my area.
I think that's where you keep in mind that the only people that are going to use that facility is that 1 to 7%. And while having that bike lane there might have made it safer for them, it certainly isn't making it more available. And I think it's a good reminder to us when we simply add more of what we've already had and we don't see bicyclists using it, well, that should tell us that we haven't done a good enough job. And so maybe using some other means of gathering some data, like looking at where you have a nexus of some things like the library, the park, and the school in a neighborhood, where there's a logical corridor for bike travel, and then, maybe reaching out to the community and finding out, where they would like to be able to bike if they felt safe doing so. You can kind of find some desire lines and maybe pick a corridor for a demonstration project. That's a real good opportunity to take the risk and discomfort people might feel out of taking away space from the motor vehicles and say, okay, we're gonna do a separated bike lane that has a buffer. We're gonna make the lanes 11 or 10 feet wide. We're gonna steal some space wherever we can, or maybe even take away the parking on one side of the street. Put this in as a temporary project that lasts a month or two. Give the community a chance to try it out with a guarantee that it will be removed, and then you'll go through the whole, design planning process. But if people can see it in action and see that people are using it, it might build some favor for it in the future.
Yeah, I was going to mention the buffer bike lane is a great solution for the locations where you have the higher speed, and the bicyclists are not feeling safe, because it provides that additional separation, for the bicyclists as they're going along. The buffer bike lane is good, and I think these unique cases is maybe why the literature and the crash modification factors from the Killian House and all the different studies. I mean, you see a disparity where sometimes, and it depends on the language too. I believe installing bike lanes has a negative crash reduction factor where you increase your bicycle crashes, but providing bike lanes, the difference between install and providing bike lanes has a positive crash reduction factor. So crashes go down, and it's kind of the interpretation as to what that means, whether you're installing or providing, and the area that you're in, has different impacts. I've always found it interesting that, and you mentioned this in your presentation, with the negative crash reduction factors, it may be a facility that has no bike lanes, has no bicycle crashes, because there's no users. But if you provide bicycle facilities, now you provide better mode for everyone to get around. But as a consequence, there will be some bicycle crashes. So that's a 100% increase. If you have 0 crashes one year, then the following year when you provide a bike lane, you have 1 crash. So you kind of need to take those statistics and those crash increases with a grain of salt.
Absolutely.
Are the techniques, one more question in the chat, are the techniques for bicycle accommodations through construction zones going to be covered in upcoming segments? It is often very difficult to maintain not just bicycle but pedestrian facilities as well. How far a detour is reasonable?
I don't have any specific data on that. I think more than anything, if we just don't forget them in our work zone plan, so often the bike lane just disappears and there's no communication about either an alternate route, or if there's multiple motor vehicle lanes, there hasn't been any consideration of reducing those to maintain the solitary bicycle lane, or alternatively, if the speeds are slow enough, making sure that there's some wayfinding and sharrows through the work zone for the bicyclists. And then keeping in mind that things like, the metal plates or the debris that you have in a work zone is going to be more taxing on the bicyclist than they would be on the pedestrian. It doesn't take anything more than the tools we already have. We just have to be thinking about applying them to bicyclists and not just discounting them and saying we can shut them out. I mean, 1 mile, half a mile detour for a bicyclist might not be bad, but if you're asking them to go 3 miles out of the way or 4 miles out of the way to avoid the work zone, you've doubled their trip, and they're probably not going to do that. They'll probably end up in the work zone in a riskier location.
Dennis, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to mention to all the attendees that we're still on to understand that Brooke has given part one of a presentation as today, but we have another one coming up on July 11th, and that'll be part two, and it's biking facilities on and along the roadway. And then the third one will be September 26th, biking facilities at intersections. So I just wanted to share that with the attendees before a lot of them left. So. And Brooke, it was very good, very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Anthony, you'll have to see if there's any other questions.
There's nothing else coming in on the chat. I suppose we can end the recording and stay on the line for a few minutes in case anything else comes up. Again, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much, Brooke, for taking the time to put together this presentation and share your knowledge with everybody.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
All right, with that, I will end the recording.